Hi, welcome to our Community 7 television show, Our Planet, Our Health. Today our session is called The Psychology of Sustainability. I'm Lori Byron. I've been a pediatrician in eastern Montana for several decades.
And I'm Rob Byron, an internal medicine specialist who also practiced in southeastern Montana for many years. Together we'll be your hosts on Our Planet, Our Health, featuring people from across Montana. Most will be health professionals who have been working to protect our health and public safety and to help make us aware of the impacts of air pollution and climate change on our health. But health is important to all of us, not just healthcare professionals. And with that in mind, some of our guests will include people who are not healthcare professionals, but professionals in their own right, who are also working to protect and improve our health.
So today we have Dr. Robert Jones with us. We'll call him Bob for the rest of the show. And he is in Helena, Montana. And he is an industrial and organizational psychologist. And he's written several books. And we'll get into that in just a little bit.
So, Bob, let's start out. Can you tell us a little bit about growing up, of where you grew up and what impact your parents had on you? And let's start there.
All right, thanks, Rob. Lori, appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. Right, I'm from Billings. I'm from here in Billings originally. My parents moved out here before I was born. My dad took a job as a lawyer. He hung up a shingle with Franklin Long, and I don't know if anybody remembers that name around here. And my mom was a musician and she had her degree in communications from University of Michigan. So she ended up as the choir mistress and director of the St. Luke's Episcopal Choir here, and also taught at Rocky Mountain College, taught communication arts there. So I came from Billings, but my parents got lured back to the Chicago area where my father's family had, where he was raised mostly, and that didn't last terribly long. They wound up breaking up. And so my dad moved back west, and my mom stayed in Chicago. So I had the school years in all the wonderful culture and joy of Chicago, and then my dad, among other things, was a ranger in Yellowstone at Old Faithful when I was growing up. So I had the best of both worlds. I arranged my parents' divorce so that I would be able to be back out here, right, in the nice part of the year.
And so I hear that your mother's not the only one capable of singing.
Right, I still do music. I tell people it was my first language, was music, and it gives me comfort. It's a very important part of my health, actually, is music. And I still sing in Musicanten, Montana here, in Helena, but we tour Montana at different times of year. And Musicanten is also a group in the DC area, so I go back there to sing now and again as well. So I sing and do other musical things. And I had a career in music for a few years after college. I went to St. Olaf College in Minnesota, which is famous for its choral music. But two of the other members of the Chicago Children's Choir with me and none of us ended up singing in the St. Olaf Choir. We all kept doing music, but and we're all still in touch, but yeah.
So what was it like as a kid when your dad was a ranger in Yellowstone? Oh,
Lori, I have many stories to tell. I think my favorites are mostly about animal-human interactions, but I've been as close to the largest bull grizzly bear, one of the rangers who saw it and scared it off, thankfully, had ever seen. So I have had a close encounter with a big bull grizzly in Yellowstone when I was 12. But most of what I enjoyed at Yellowstone was actually people from all over the world coming through to see our beautiful natural spaces and our open spaces, which of course are also, as you guys know better than me, a hugely important part of our health. But those social groupings and getting to know people quickly, that was a really important experience living in Yellowstone, at Old Faithful especially.
Okay. And so you've told us a little bit about growing up. So tell us about sort of college and college and beyond, the official part of life,
yeah, my real detail, the things I put on my resume, right? So my wife and I met at St. Olaf College, where we were both members of the Para College, though I robbed the cradle. She was several years younger than me, and we ended up I got my degree in, we called it political theory, but it was actually a history and philosophy, where I studied Elizabethan England, which was the beginning of the Renaissance and Reformation. And my hero was Elizabeth I of England, was how I ended up studying that area. And but don't worry, I had a practical minor, you know, in literature, right? So, but at graduation, I got a job working for the Chicago Children's Choir in music, right? So I was, you know, I was set at the graduation ceremony. I had a job. It was just in music was the problem. So anyway, I did that for a while. My wife and I got married a few years later, and we went to Columbus, Ohio, after she finished her graduate studies at University of Chicago. And she's the brains of the family. And we ended up in Columbus, Ohio, and I had been working in banks as my side hustle after I kind of gave up music to become a married person, and wound up being robbed at gunpoint. And so when we got to Columbus, and the front page news was something like, "Bank robbery capital of America again this year," I decided that occupational choice was not for me anymore. So I went back to grad school, and I took my first undergraduate statistics class, and that's where my epiphany occurred. I discovered that not only am I good at it, and my area of psychology is hugely reliant upon statistics, which is a biological, actually Florence Nightingale invented descriptive statistics. Most people don't know that. But anyhow, yeah, I went back to grad school. I got my doctorate in industrial and organizational psychology with a minor in quantitative methods. So then and during that time and after, I was working in industry, including, I hate to say this in front of two MDs, but I worked at a large insurance company's individual life and health division in their cabinet with their executives. You've seen probably TV shows about people like me helping the devils, you know. So, actually not. There are plenty of very good people in insurance too. But anyhow, yeah. Then I got a phone call from a guy who had heard about me and said, "Hey, we're starting a new master's program at Missouri State University, and we are looking for somebody like you to help guide the group, help work with the group." And so I ended up working in academia, which is not common in my field. Better than 75% of the IO psychologists running around out there, master's and doctorate level, are in industry and government and consulting for both. So I've done a lot of consulting work for large industry, often with the questions that we're going to talk about here very much in mind and very much part of the decision-making process.
So in a nutshell, what is an industrial and organizational psychologist? Why I had never heard of until this week.
Right. It's me. In a nutshell, I'm an IO psychologist. No, it is a specialty area that uses the scientist-practitioner model to, again, statistics, gather information to help make decisions in corporations, usually large organizations, both government and for-profit, mostly for-profit. So it's an area that's been around a long time, but people in my field tend to keep their heads down because we also do work that deals with high-stakes kinds of things. So I, for example, have done a little work with the Air Force and that kind of thing. So it's an area that most people really do not understand until they know more about it than most people know about it. So it's been low profile. It's been around a long time. Does that help? Do you want to hear a story about it? My favorite IO psychologist, sort of?
By all means.
Okay. So we all know that a big problem that we experience right now is with overconsumption. We have enormous amounts of waste. We're driving pickup trucks instead of Priuses and so on and so forth. How did that all happen? Answer, part of it goes back to an IO psychologist named Frank Stanton, who during the Depression in 1932 did his dissertation on trying to increase consumption, trying to help advertisers increase people's consumption. So trying to do good, right? The only problem is that his little box that he invented, called the now Nielsen ratings box, all right, which he sold to AC Nielsen, got used to target market people and is still, of course, used. That same methodology is still used. And then he, realizing his sins, went to work as the president of a brand new .com called CBS. So Frank Stanton applied quantitative psychology to getting people to run out and buy stuff they didn't need, and lots of it. And so IO psychology is also partly responsible for many of the problems that we have. But guess what? Those same methods can be used to help our environmental situation in a lot of ways. So it's being used, I have used it in that way for many years.
So thank you for making those connections, and let's make them even more.
All right. All right. Well,
so you've expressed a lot of interest in sustainability in very many different ways in some of our conversations. Can you, for our audience, connect that even more to your work in psychology?
Yes, sure. I usually start with both my parents being, well, my father being very much into science. He was actually more a scientist. He finally admitted it later in life that he would have been better as a scientist. He studied for his undergraduate physics and then economics, and he was fascinated by the natural world. So, and he also did something a lot of parents don't know how to do. When his children asked him questions, he answered them meaningfully. He didn't tell them, oh, shut up, kid, or that's the way the world is, or, you know, that's the way God made it, or whatever, but rather, when I asked, why is the sky blue, Daddy, when I'm 3 or whatever it was, I remember his answer because it was light refracting through the chemicals in the atmosphere that cause colors that we represent as colors in our minds. And so he got me, he knew I was fascinated by paleontology when I was 7 or 8 years old, and he bought a copy of Edwin H. Colbert's paleontology book. Now, Edward H. Colbert was the curator of paleontology at the Smithsonian, and at age 8, he sat me down on his lap and read me Edward H. Colbert's paleontology. So one of the questions I had was, hey, Dad, are we all going to be fossils someday too? And he said, if we're lucky, you know, we'll be fossils. And at the same time, he was reading Scientific American his whole life. He took Scientific American, and he said, well, you know, they have this climate change problem that's happening. This is 1960. And we don't know whether it's going to warm up the climate or cool it down at this point. Of course, we now know warm it up for sure. I started thinking, so when are we going to become fossils? You know, are we going to become fossils sooner or later, right? So I had to get perspective on these questions at an early age. And of course, that meant having to deal with all the kind of scary stuff that went with that, all the anxieties that go with that. Hey, I really am a psychologist. I use the word anxiety, right, to describe this. And what I discovered from my sister, who went to school here her first few years with kids who were from the Crow Agency, was that Native American people saw the world in a very different way, at least at that time. I don't know if this is still true, but that the combination of humanity and the world around us was a very different understanding. And her whole life has been dedicated to Native American issues. She's been, long story. But anyway, I learned that there are other points of view than the kind of mainstream that I was hearing from my friends in school and that sort of thing. And so that question of sustainability and will we become fossils sooner or later has been in my mind for a very long time, as have questions of other kinds of questions of inclusion. Because sustainability, folks, is an inclusion question. It's about whether we think about the needs and interests of future planet mates when we make our choices today. And it is not about DEI, it's about inclusion. Do we want to have other people or take other people's interests in mind when we are making our choices today? And you know my answer to that question is, we've talked about this a little bit already, that we don't stand up by ourselves. All the data, all the evidence from biology tells us that we are not solitary creatures. We don't survive as solitary creatures. We have to find ways to include one another. And one of the important things we're talking about now is how different people's different points of view, if we're able to manage the conflicts among them, give us great ideas. All kinds of good ideas come out of that kind of margin, is the way I think of it, between different kinds of worldviews. So how we manage those margins is important.
So in your book, Sustainable Solutions, you note that humanity has molded the planet to help us for generations or centuries or our entire existence, and that now we need to alter ourselves to help the sustainability of the planet. You want to explain that a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Lori. The term that I always come back to is from Rachel Carson, famous author in the early 60s, who said that we need to find ways to manage ourselves. So there's all great climate science out there. We know that climate change, and now we know about microplastics, all kinds of things that are happening around us as a result of our organizing ourselves in different ways. So that science is there. Where we don't have science is how to manage ourselves, which is the real question, the essential question. If we want to make a better world for future planet mates, then we need to figure out how to manage ourselves. And we've got a bunch of science to do that. And IO psychology is organizational psychology, is about how humans organize, right? And how do we manage that way of organizing and the decisions that go on. So it seemed very obvious to me when I started working in this area and studying this area that there are plenty of good answers and certainly ethical questions that we have to confront there as well. But much of what we need to think about isn't the climate, it isn't the trash, it isn't the PAFs. We know about those. The question is more about how we manage ourselves and the science that provides us an answer to that 1962 call we haven't really been answering very well from that time. So my work, Sustainable Solutions, was actually invited by American Psychological Association after I'd written a couple of other books. And it has, I think, that call at least sketched out, some ideas for how we move forward. And quick, should I give the spoiler here? Quick spoiler.
Please.
Yeah, thanks.
Please.
It's all about how we organize ourselves, not how we act individually. Yes, how we act individually makes a difference. So people need to attend, they need to think about the things they're doing, they need to see a problem when there's a problem, or an opportunity when they see there's an opportunity. All those individual level decision-making steps are important. But most of our decisions as individuals, even the best educated, most knowledgeable people, most of our days are guided by little quick rules of thumb. Heuristics. So I have lunch at this hour, or I drive my car on this route. And we don't even think about most of those decisions most of the time. So really where our hack is, where our advantage as a species and our problem as a species both comes from, is how we work together, how we invent social organizations, and how we decide, for those in the audience who are interested in how to apply this, which you probably are going to ask me about anyway. but how to apply it is, you can tell I'm not at all excited about this topic, right? But anyway, yeah, figuring out what are the things that a group that you're thinking of working with are trying to accomplish, and more importantly, trying to avoid. So are we in this organization because we're trying to avoid this, that, and the other bad thing? Or are we in this organization because we see an opportunity to do something good, right? And that fundamental part of the decision you make about which organization you work with, so I know you guys work with some of those latter organizations, that we're going to do this good thing here, we're going to make this good thing happen, right? And yeah, we have to avoid some things along the way, but that intention toward hopeful outcomes or achievement of certain outcomes, however you want to put it, is an essential first question you want to ask. And there are ways to figure out, I mean, in the books I talk about, here are some of the clues about, when you see an organization that you might want to join, here are some questions you might want to answer, and you might have to join the organization to find out more about it, about the answers to those questions.
Perfect. And I'm going to dig into that a little more, and you've said it multiple times, and I hope most of in our audience have heard that, and that is that even those of us who have maybe lots of training or secure jobs or everything, when we're by ourselves, it's scary. Mm-hmm. And one of the keys to everything you've said is we need to join together, whether it's join an organization, a group. Talk a little bit more about that for people.
Right. Well, thank you, Rob. Yeah, that's one of the way I think of it as a rule of our humanity is we're not just like other social creatures. Most social creatures are drawn to one another naturally. There are biological reasons for them to be mating or to be hunting together and even to organize themselves in real time. So my favorite are the predatory cetaceans who speak to each other in whistles and clicks about where they're going to move now to get the fish they need to get together, right? We are that on steroids. We have got to have, we're built fundamentally to be with other people. And you got it, you hit it on the noggin, which is, it's because otherwise the world's a really scary place. I don't want to go too far into the science here, but I will tell you about Kahneman and Tversky. Well, Kahneman's book, 2011 book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but he won a Nobel Prize in 2003 in economics for demonstrating how we attend to our fears first. We're trying to avoid dying, is when we're thinking, or being injured. And so we have that urge to avoid those anxious kind of situations. But the way we deal with that is to seek certainty. We look for ways to not have to make the wrong choice. And error, in psychology, we all know the fundamental assumption, and statistics for sure, statistics all built about error. You know, we know we're going to make mistakes. Of course we are. And it's not always a failure. It's mostly a learning experience, right? But taking the time and the energy, the resources that we have to put to making errors and coping with the outcome of our errors, that's a demanding bunch of resources. So finding other people to help us bear those resources, take on those problems of, if I screw it up here, you'll help me over there, kinds of things, is really built into us. And I hesitate to use the term grown-ups, but I'm going to use the term grown-ups. that instead of falling back on authority telling you how you're supposed to behave so you don't worry because the authority has it all figured out, or instead of doing what a lot of teenagers do, and for good reason, we all need to know how to use those authority and conformity rules. So we look around ourselves and we're both wearing clothes. It's all, we're dressed. That's a conformity. That's something we all have chosen to do this morning. But after relying upon authority and conformity, grown-ups have to make decisions in the difficulties of error and uncertainty. And as MDs, you guys, most healthcare professionals, anyone who's listening, knows this problem. And it's a very consequential decision. If you don't mind me going off for just a sec, I played in a jazz band with a bunch of doctors for a bunch of years called Caduceus, right? It was a wonderful band, and many of them were surgeons. And you know what an error is in surgery, right? It's like death, dismemberment, lawsuit, lose your license, all these awful, big outcomes, terrifying, anxiety-producing outcomes, right? But you know what they call an error in a jazz band? Improvisation. It's a desirable thing. So it's kind of therapeutic to have this understanding that, okay, we are going to make these errors. And if we're grown-ups, we know we're going to make these errors and we're going to have to deal with that. That's how it is. That's how life is. And dealing with the anxiety first, a lot of times is important, but then understanding that we rely on one another. So if I screw it up, I'm going to make a bad decision and nick a vein or nick an artery or something, I got somebody else there watching who's going to say, wait a minute, you want to watch out for that. Or, this applies to Ugg and Grunt, who just got out of the cave and had to figure out how to put a roof over their head because they were too obnoxious in the cave. They got kicked out, and now they got to build a roof to keep dry because it's raining and cold, right? So they got to figure out how to cooperate to put that up, because one of them alone is maybe going to be able to create a tent, imagine and create a tent. But two of them now I can say, hey, can you put that, I'll be, hey Grunt, could you hold up that post over there, and I'll hold a post here, and we need the third person, bring somebody else out of the cave who's obnoxious, and they'll put so it requires those group efforts for us just to survive, never mind for us to manage error and manage uncertainty and even managing anxiety. So join that group. You got a group you care about, a topic or an issue. You find a group that you will find some of that help from, and you're a whole lot better off person.
So we see these enormous numbers of kids, the majority of the kids nowadays who have anxieties about their future, about the viability of the planet. And of course, a lot of them are in social media a lot, so they're isolated. I realize that that's not your specialty, but do you have any advice for kids who are worried about this?
Oh, that's a beautiful question, Lori. I love that question. And our kids refer to it, I have 2 sons, and they refer to it as doom scrolling. Stop doom scrolling. You know, that's the first thing, is don't scratch the anxiety itch. That's not going to help. And but there's actually a wonderful book, recent book, that I've been unable to read the whole thing, but read the fly cover and stuff. I think it's called The Anxious Generation, something like that. And it talks about what parents can do and caregivers and teachers can do to help with that. You know, one of the simplest things, so many things, as you know better than me, start in childhood. So my dad answering questions for me led to a whole life, wonderful life, you know, versus parents who didn't answer those questions, and kids had to rely on these other things. So, you know, answering your kids' questions honestly, but also take their phone away for, you know, don't let them even have a phone till they're 9 or 10 or something like that. But also, my wife's a children's librarian and quite an accomplished one, and she became a professor teaching it. And she said, so when your child is looking at their phone, and they're maybe doom scrolling, you say, what you seeing on there? You know, you don't look happy, or you look happy, what are you seeing? And talk with them about what they're experiencing. And you hit the nail on the head, really, saying, don't let them be isolated. Talk with them about these things. Yeah, we're going to be fossils, and we're going to, someday we're all going to be, you know, dead, and we'll see what happens to the climate if it kills all of us, whatever. But let's talk about it. And all of a sudden, you know, you're not nicking an artery anymore. you're now dealing with the problem in a proactive and optimistic kind of a way.
Well, Bob, we're about out of time, and I want to thank you for a outstanding conversation, and I think we both learned a lot, and I hope our audience did. You've done a good job of it, but again, let us have you sum up, what do you want our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
Thank you, Rob, for that opportunity. I would suggest that people in the audience look for groups that you can be part of. And even if they're just to help you with your anxieties, that's a good start. It'd be better if you can find groups that are taking affirmative action or doing things to help. And I don't mean affirmative action in the, you know, legal sense, but just taking action that moves you towards something affirmative, something positive. And understand that's how we're built. That's not some strange thing, and being independent doesn't mean being isolated. Being independent means being able to make good decisions. And so join a group that makes good decisions, or you're trying to make good decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure, yeah.